Hello everyone, I'm so glad we meet again. Today we will travel far, far into the Japanese countryside, to a mountain town obscured by mist, a place where the air itself feels heavy with silence. We are not checking into a modern hotel tonight. Oh no. We are guests at the Omiya Ryokan, an old wooden inn perched precariously on a cliffside, famous for its perfect view of the deep valley fog and, less famously, for its unsettling history. The locals whisper that you might not survive the first night there with your sense of sanity intact. As you step out of the taxi, the gravel crunching under your feet sounds impossibly loud in the pervasive quiet. The only illumination comes from a single, slightly flickering lantern hanging above the carved wooden entrance. The rain has stopped, but the entire structure seems to be weeping, with dark streaks running down the cedar walls. Before we fully step inside the darkness that awaits us, I must ask, do you have the courage to step into that place? So before we begin, please give me a like on this video and subscribe to my channel, so you and I can meet more often, but only if you truly enjoy the content I make. Let me know your location and the local time in the comments below. I'm curious to see how far apart we are, yet sharing this moment of quiet dread. Now relax, create a little background noise for our story, and let's begin this journey. You push the heavy sliding door open. It groans, a deep, weary sound, as if the inn itself is sighing at your arrival. The air inside is instantly colder than the humid night air outside, a dry, penetrating cold that smells faintly of old wood, dust, and something else. Something metallic, like old coins or perhaps dried blood. But you dismiss the thought immediately. It's an old inn. After all, old things carry old smells. You slide the door shut behind you. The small entry space, the Genkin, is dim, lit by just one weak, yellow bulb hanging high above. You remove your shoes, placing them carefully on the small wooden rack, a necessary ritual. There is a strange lack of ambient noise. No muffled television, no clatter from a distant kitchen, just silence. This level of quiet is unnatural, isn't it? It settles into your ears, all pressing on your eardrums. On the innkeeper, a very old woman with severe gray hair pulled back tight, appears as if she had been standing there all along, blending into the shadows. She bows low, her movements stiff and slow, and you notice her eyes. They are deep set, dark, and utterly devoid of expression. She doesn't smile. She doesn't speak. She simply holds out a trembling hand, indicating you should follow her down a long, narrow hallway. This is the kind of hallway that seems to actively swallow the light. The wooden floorboards are dark, polished over decades by countless footsteps, and they groan softly beneath your weight, a low, constant complaint. Are you hearing that it's not just the wood? It sounds like a voice sighing just beneath the surface. You pause for just a moment. Maybe the foundations are settling. Maybe you are just tired. The place could use a good coat of varnish, don't you think? You think to yourself, trying to break the tension with a silent, internal joke. But the humor instantly dies in the heavy atmosphere. This is the kind of inn where you are certain you will be charged extra if you break the silence. As you follow her, you notice small, almost imperceptible details. The paper walls of the rooms lining the hall, the shoji, are faintly yellowed and slightly bowed. telling silent tales of damp winters and forgotten years. On one wall, a framed, faded photograph shows the inn many decades ago, perhaps in the early 1900s. The picture is so dark you can only make out the general shape of the building, but it gives you a tiny shiver to think that the same planks of wood you are walking on now were walked on by guests from a different world. The hallway seems endless. You pass rooms you will talk one after another, shies, and every door is closed. Yet, you have this unnerving feeling that they aren't empty. Maybe it's just the whispery atmosphere, but you feel eyes tracing your movement from behind the thin paper walls. Do you dare look back? No. You keep your focus on the rigid back of the innkeeper. We are almost there. Your room, she gestures with her hand, is the very last one. She stops. The last door on the narrow corridor is not a sliding shoji panel like the others. It is a solid, heavy wooden door, dark with age, and secured with a thick iron latch. It feels different, heavier, as if it wasn't meant to be opened often, or perhaps ever again. Do you notice how your heart rate has subtly sped up? It's a very slight flutter, a tiny alarm bell ringing somewhere deep in your lizard brain. The innkeeper turns to face you, and this is where the silence becomes truly terrifying. She is standing so close now, and you realize something profoundly unsettling. She makes absolutely no sound. Not a rustle of her dark, traditional clothing, not the faintest inhalation or exhalation. She is utterly still, a perfectly preserved statue of an old woman. Existing in a vacuum of sound, you instinctively lean in just a fraction, straining your ears in the unnatural quiet. You want to hear a breath, a sigh, anything to prove she is simply an elderly person, not something else. But there is nothing. It's a silence that belongs to the bottom of the ocean, or perhaps a tomb. You clear your throat, a small, polite attempt to break the glass of tension that has formed between you two. But the sound feels offensive, loud and clumsy. She offers you a large, antique key. The key is heavy and cold, made of black iron, and it has a single, beautifully ornate bow, a key from an entirely different century. You reach out your hand to take it, and for a fleeting, horrifying instant, your fingers brush against hers. Her skin is impossibly cold, dry like old paper, but smooth, like stone polished by water for 1,000 years. It sends a sharp, involuntary chill up your arm, far deeper than the ambient cold of the hallway. She performs a quick, silent bow again, her eyes fixed on the floorboards, and then, without turning, she simply drifts back down the corridor, her movement too fluid, too effortless for an old woman. You watch her retreat into the gloom, waiting for the floorboards to creak under her weight. But they don't. She is gone, absorbed back into the darkness from which she emerged, leaving you standing alone before the final, locked door. "Well," you mutter, finally breaking the deep silence around you with a forced internal joke. At least I didn't have to carry my own bags. Service in the afterlife, I suppose. But the thought is immediately regretted. You turn the massive key in the lock. The mechanism inside groans and resists, a chorus of rusty metal protesting its use. It takes more force than you expected. And when the tumbler finally clicks open, The sound is like a gunshot in the profound quiet of the inn. You slide the heavy door open. The room is large, traditional, and instantly familiar tatami mats. A low wooden table in the center, and a thick futon already laid out. An unexpected sign of service in such a deserted place. The scent here is different too, less dust, more cedar. But underneath it, you catch that same cold, metallic scent from the entrance, only stronger. You step inside, taking in the gloom. The windows are sealed with heavy, dark paper, allowing only thin slivers of moonlight to slice through the edges. The darkness feels less like the absence of light and more like a presence of something heavy, something that presses down on your chest. This specific type of silence, this heavy, ancient dread, reminds you of the terrifying stories surrounding the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923. In the immediate aftermath, thousands in the remote mountain villages experienced a dreadful silence, not from the quake itself, but from the lack of any news. They waited for weeks, suspended in a state of quiet terror, surrounded by silence, not knowing if the world they knew had ended. That deep, isolating uncertainty, that silent waiting, is exactly the flavor of the atmosphere in this room. It's the silence of after the scream. You drop your small bag on the floor. The sound, muffled by the tatami, is still too loud. You realize the strange detail of the innkeeper's silence. She never exhaled. You try to mimic it, holding your breath, standing perfectly still, and the effort is immediately straining. How long was she standing there, waiting for you, without a single breath? Does this chill you? It should. It means she wasn't waiting, she was simply there. You try the small joke again, trying to regain control. Maybe she's just a master of meditation, teaching us all a lesson in quietude. But you know the truth. The stillness was unnerving, not peaceful. As you look closer at the room, you spot the strangest detail. There is a small, perfectly circular area on the tatami mat, right near the corner of the wall, where the straw is completely flattened and slightly discolored, as if something heavy and small had been left in that exact spot for 100 years, never moving. It's too round to be a footprint, too small to be a piece of furniture. It is just a perfect circle of unjust darkness on the immaculate matting. You approach it slowly, kneeling down, bringing your face close to the floor. The cold that permeates the inn seems to emanate directly from this one small patch. You press your finger against it. It is dry, yet it feels damp, almost oily. You stand up quickly, shaking off the chill. You decide not to look too closely at the darkness tonight. After all, you've paid for a full night's stay, and you have a long day tomorrow. You try to laugh, a gentle sorrowsome, forced laugh that catches in your throat. If I hear a bell now, you promise the room, I'm checking out immediately, regardless of the refund policy. It's a silly thing to say, but the tension is thick enough to cut. You slide the door shut and carefully latch the heavy iron bolt. The room is now completely sealed. It is only you, the dark, and the weight of the inn's silent history. You turn toward the futon, ready to settle in, but that circular spot in the corner keeps drawing your eye. You swear, for just a second, The darkness in that small patch seemed to move. You settle onto the thick futon, not quite ready to sleep, but certainly ready to stop standing in the oppressive silence. You decide a moment of stillness is needed, a way to acclimatize to this heavy atmosphere. You are lying flat on your back, staring up at the dark wooden ceiling beams. They are massive, rough-hewn timbers, dark with age and soot from 1,000 long-forgotten hearth fires. It feels like you are sleeping inside the skeleton of some ancient, silent beast. Then you hear it. It is faint, almost swallowed by the thickness of the air piece, but undeniably present. A high-pitched, thin sound. Do you hear it? It's not loud enough to be an immediate cause for alarm, but it's sharp enough to catch the attention. A thin thread of sorrow woven into the tapestry of silence. It is the sound of a child crying. It's not a full, bellowing sob of pain or anger. It is a soft, continuous whimper. The sound of a young child, maybe 4 or 5 years old, crying to themselves, quietly, endlessly. It sounds desperately lonely. Your first logical thought, of course, is that the sound is coming from outside, perhaps a nearby house, or a child staying in a different section of the ryokan. But you immediately dismiss this. Remember the profound silence of the inn, the utter lack of any other guests, and the genkan. The shoe rack was empty, save for your own pair. This inn is empty, and the sound doesn't seem to be traveling through space. It feels as if it is emanating from the walls themselves, muffled and compressed. You sit up slowly, pressing your ear against the cold, dark wood of the wall nearest to the flattened, circular spot on the tatami. The sound is marginally clearer here, a soft, rhythmic, heartbreaking whimper, whimper, whimper. It's persistent, it is endless. You try a quick, nervous joke to break your focus, whispering to the air. Must be a very demanding guest next door, probably complaining about the Wi-Fi. I'd give them 5 stars for commitment, though. But the joke is weak, dissolving immediately into the cold, metallic scent of the room. You retreat from the wall, your heart pounding a little faster now. This is not normal. This level of continuous, mournful sound in a completely deserted structure is starting to tickle the edge of genuine fear. You realize you need a distraction, something tangible. You reach into your bag and pull out a small flashlight, a habit you've always maintained when traveling to old, remote places. You shine the thin beam around the room, slowly, meticulously searching for the source. The light lands on the single, thin futon where you were just lying. The cover is slightly askew from where you sat up, and there, tucked into the crease of the fold, barely visible, is a piece of folded paper. You pick it up. It is not modern paper, nor is it rice paper for writing. It is stiff, aged paper, the color of old bone. As you carefully unfold it, the paper makes a dry, brittle sound, like a dead leaf crunching underfoot. It is an ancient paper doll. It is roughly cut, a flat, simple silhouette of a child, perhaps 4 inches high. The figure has no distinct facial features, just a blank, perfect oval for a head, and 2 short stylized arms. It is a hitogata, the kind of paper substitute used in certain old Japanese rituals, rituals of cleansing, of substitution, sometimes of curses. The chilling detail is not its age or its use, but its specific presentation. The little paper figure has been meticulously, painfully tied with a single, incredibly thin strand of black thread, binding its arms tightly to its sides. It looks like a tiny, flat prisoner. The thread is knotted multiple times, tiny, tight knots that must have taken immense, focused concentration to create, and the figure itself is strangely damp to the touch. Only on its lower half. You turn it over in your hands and the sound of the child's crying becoming fractionally louder, almost like a direct response to your discovery. Can you feel the hair standing up on the back of your neck? That's your body giving you a clear warning. This is where the horror begins to bleed into historical reality. You suddenly recall a brief, horrific detail from the Edo period, the legend of the Sarugaku, or monkey music ritual. It was a dark, rarely practiced cleansing rite, where a paper doll, representing a person's affliction or sin, would be meticulously wrapped and then thrown into a flowing river or hidden in a remote place. The figure was supposed to carry the negativity away from them, but if the figure was found and touched, especially if it was bound or broken, it was believed that the sorrow, the sickness, or the curse of the represented person would be immediately transferred to the finder. It was a terrifying form of spiritual transference, and it was considered an ultimate act of malice to intentionally leave a bound doll where it could be found. You are holding an ultimate act of malice in your hand. The whimper from the wall suddenly falters, breaking its rhythm. It seems to gasp, a tiny, chilling sound that causes your blood to run cold. You look down at the paper doll. You realize you are holding the physical embodiment of the sorrow you are hearing. The crying has just paused. What happens now? The paper doll feels like ice in your hand. You stare at the tiny bound figure, and then back at the dark wall, where the sound just gasped. Did you feel that small, cold prickle in your palm? It's a very strange sensation, almost like the paper itself just sighed. The whimpering resumes, but it's louder now, closer, and with a desperate edge that wasn't there before. It's almost a muffled plea. You hurriedly fold the little paper figure and shove it deep into your trouser pocket, as if you could somehow unsee or untouch it. Your skin crawls with the knowledge that you have just physically interacted with the sorrow of this place. You need to step away from the wall. You stand up, quickly moving to the center of the tatami mat, and try to rationalize the sound. Maybe it's the wind whistling through a crack in the foundation. Maybe the building is constructed over some kind of abandoned well that creates this acoustic effect. But that metallic, cold scent is still too strong, and the crying is too specifically like a child. Your gaze falls upon the window panels, the shoji screens. They are supposed to be translucent, letting in the soft light of the moon, but these are covered in a thick, dark paper, almost like cardstock, sealed tight against the outside world. This is a very strange detail for a traditional inn. Why block out the light so completely? You approach the window, your movements slow and deliberate, as if you are moving through cold molasses. You gently place a finger on the heavy paper screen. It feels cold and dry, but near the bottom edge, where the frame meets the wood, you notice something truly unsettling. A narrow, dark stain that runs vertically down the white paper. It looks exactly like water damage. But it's not the brownish yellow of typical water stains. This stain is deep black, like ink that has bled into the fibers. You lean in closer, bringing your flashlight beam right to the edge. The stain isn't just dark. It seems to shimmer faintly. And the texture is wrong. It looks like it was made with an endless, patient dripping, always in the same exact spot. You cautiously touch the very edge of the stain with your fingertip. It is completely dry. Do you hear the subtle shift in the crying? It has changed its pitch again, going higher, sharper, almost like a bird's frantic distress call. It's impossible to ignore now. You look away from the window, back towards the corner where the crying seems strongest. You recall a curious, chilling piece of local history regarding this very region in the late 17th century. It wasn't about a ghost, but about a harsh reality the mountain seclusion edicts during times of severe famine. Certain remote villages practiced ubasut, the forced abandonment of the elderly. But there were darker whispers if resources were scarce enough. Some desperate families were said to have practiced a form of child seclusion, particularly targeting the youngest, weakest child. They would build a small, sealed annex or simply board up the room of the child, leaving them with just a token amount of food and water, believing that this sacrifice would appease the mountain spirits and save the rest of the family. The room would then be sealed completely with dark paper and thick planks, so that no sound or light could pass through. No one knows why the villagers thought this was necessary, but the academic debates of the early 1900s centered on the sheer incomprehensibility of this custom, the cold logic of saving the whole by silently sacrificing the least. The thought hits you with the force of a cold wave. You are in a room sealed with dark paper. You are hearing the sound of a continuously crying child. You back away from the window, your spine rigid. You look down at your pocket where the paper doll is hidden. The little figure, bound and discarded. Was this room, this very room, an annex? You try to take a deep, calming breath, but the cold air feels thin and inadequate. Look, you whisper to the empty room, attempting to find a pocket of control. I appreciate the historical tour, but I specifically asked for a room with a view, not a historical reenactment of an ancient tragedy. It is a terrible joke, but it's all you have right now. You turn your attention to the large, beautifully crafted storage cabinet, the tansu, sitting against the far wall. It is made of dark, heavy wood, clearly an antique, decorated with beautiful iron fitting. It is massive. You open one of the lower drawers, hoping to find an extra blanket, or maybe just a mundane, ordinary object to ground you back in reality. Inside, the drawer is mostly empty, smelling strongly of old cedar. But there is one thing, a small, dark wooden box, intricately carved. You pull it out, the wood surprisingly light in your hand. You lift the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of dry, brittle silk, is a single, rusted iron coin. It's very old, almost black with age. But what catches your attention is a strange, mysterious detail. The silk on which the coin rests is not just old, It is meticulously folded into a continuous loop, an endless braid of fabric that circles the coin, always returning to itself. And beneath the silk, etched into the base of the box, is a single tiny kanji character. It means wait. The crying outside the wall suddenly changes its tone again. It is no longer a whimper. It is a slow, steady, rhythmic sound, like a deep, heavy exhalation, followed by a slight pause. It sounds exactly like a breath, a child's breath, caught in a perpetual loop of sorrow. Waiting, you slowly close the box, the metallic click of the latch echoing loudly in the silent room. You feel a sudden, overpowering urge to leave, to unlatch the door and flee. But a cold curiosity, a terrifying compulsion to know the truth of the waiting sound, pins you to the spot. You place the small wooden box back into the drawer, but you don't close the drawer completely. Leaving it slightly ajar feels safer. Somehow, as if the gap might let some of the oppressive silence escape. You step back, taking in the room again. It is utterly traditional, yet utterly terrifying. Every shadow seems to hold a shape, every corner a secret. The sound of the child's rhythmic breathing, that soft, repeated hush, hush, hush that sounds like a sustained sob, is constant now. It's no longer coming from a specific point. It feels like the air itself is breathing this sorrowful sound. Are you sure you want to stay in this room? You could gather your things, key in hand, and demand to see the expressionless innkeeper. But something in the oppressive silence tells you that leaving now might be more dangerous than staying. You decide to explore the room more thoroughly, specifically the area near the source of the sound. You approach the corner where the floor mat was flattened into that unsettling circular shape. You kneel down again, slowly. The closer you get, the more pronounced the cold becomes, a bone-deep chill that defies the humidity of the night. You use your flashlight beam to scan the edges of the tatami mats. The mats are tightly woven and fitted. But here, in this corner, you notice a seam that is slightly wider than the others. It's almost imperceptible. A tiny sliver of darkness between the two mats. You carefully slide the tip of your fingernail into the gap. It's dusty, but your nail catches on something stiff, something thin and fragile. You gently pry at it, wiggling your finger until a thin, brittle object pops free. It is another piece of paper. Not a doll this time, but a single, folded strip of paper so dry it feels like touching ash. As you unfold it, a small puff of dust rises into the beam of your flashlight. The paper is inscribed with faint, messy characters. They are not complex kanji, but simple, shaky drawings, like those made by a child, a sun, a poorly drawn cat, and a sequence of vertical lines. The chilling detail, the one that makes your breath hitch, is that the paper smells faintly of earth damp, rich soil, as if it had been buried recently, or perhaps for a very, very long time. This paper, this tiny message from the past, connects directly to a strange, mysterious detail often overlooked in the history of the Inns region. There's an academic debate that no one can settle about the ritual of the child's first snow. In this region, a custom dictated that when a child saw their first snow, They were supposed to draw their wishes or prayers on a strip of paper and bury it near a specific kind of cedar tree. The debate lies here. The purpose was ostensibly to ask for a good harvest. But some scholars argue that the true function was to mark the boundaries of what the child knew and to quietly limit their world, ensuring they never grew too adventurous or questioned the old ways. It was a ritual designed to bury their curiosity alongside their drawing. Now you hold one of those buried, forgotten drawings, clearly taken from the earth, and placed right here, in this room, beside the spot where the crying originates. You look around the room, your eyes darting nervously. Oh, the previous guest must have been a very thoughtful historian. You joke out loud, your voice sounding thin and weak, leaving little clues like this, or perhaps they just forgot their trash. But the humor is utterly gone. This is intentional. These things are being placed for you. You realize you must be moving very slowly because the crying sound has maintained its relentless, hypnotic rhythm, a constant, suffocating blanket of sorrow. You decide to commit to the most illogical yet necessary action. You need to look behind the walls. The room's main wall, the one facing the cliffside, is constructed of a beautiful, old cedar paneling. But the corner where the crying is loudest is bordered by a different material, a thin layer of plaster over a rougher, older wooden frame. You press your ear against the plaster, placing your hand flat against the surface. The wood beneath is cold, but your palm detects a very faint vibration, a tiny, internal thrumming that matches the rhythm of the breathing sound. Can you feel it, that soft, persistent vibration, like a tiny, trapped bird trying to beat its way out? You run your fingers lightly over the surface of the plaster. The texture is smooth, but your fingertips catch on a barely perceptible line. You kneel down, using your flashlight again. The line is not a crack. It is a meticulously drawn, almost hidden outline of a small rectangle, perfectly aligned with the floor mat. Someone, a long time ago, sealed something up here with great care, with a growing sense of dread. You gently tap the plaster with your knuckles. The sound is different here than the rest of the wall. Everywhere else, the wall sounds solid, full. Here, it sounds hollow, deeply, frighteningly hollow, like a small, empty box. The crying stops, immediately, utterly. The rhythmic hush, hush, hush is replaced by a profound, echoing silence. This is the climax of this moment. The sudden cessation of the sound is infinitely more frightening than the sound itself. The silence rushes in, famon, filling the void, pressing against your eardrums until they ache. You stand frozen, your hands still resting on the cold, hollow spot on the wall. The metallic smell is overwhelmingly strong now, so intense it makes your eyes water. You wait, paralyzed, your body rigid with the expectation of a scream, a bang, or a sudden, violent eruption. But there is only silence, the deep, heavy, expectant silence of a hunter who has finally spotted its prey. The silence is a weapon. It hangs in the air, thick and suffocating, making you acutely aware of your own small, rapid breaths. You stand perfectly still, waiting for the return of the crying, or perhaps for something worse, but the void remains absolute. It is the sound of a lung that is emptied for the final time. You realize that your interaction with the paper doll the moment you disturbed it, moved it, and then touched the strip of paper with the child's drawing has fundamentally changed the rhythm of this horror. It is no longer a distant, mournful tape loop. It is a direct, responsive presence. You take a tentative step backward, away from the hollow spot on the wall. Your eyes scan the room again, searching for anything that has moved, anything that has shifted in your periphery since the sound cut out. Everything seems exactly the same: the dark tansu cabinet, the folded futon, the sealed window screens. Yet, the atmosphere is utterly transformed. The silence reminds you of a terrifying historical event from the early 1900s in this region, which gives a horrifying context to the inn's location, the legend of the silent watchers of the Kiso Road. This was a brutal, true event where several travelers vanished on a remote mountain path. The chilling detail was that their disappearances were often preceded by an intense, unnatural silence, a void of all bird song, insect sounds, and wind noise. Local folklore claimed that the silence was not random, but the signal of a Junin mono, a spirit of prolonged suffering stopping its constant lament to focus entirely on its victim. The silence was the moment the trap sprung. Well, if that's the case, you whisper to yourself, managing a trembling, dark joke, I guess I just interrupted a very long, very sad concert. My apologies to the performer. You need to break the tension, and you need to understand the room's geometry better. You decide to shine your flashlight beam up towards the ceiling again, looking at the massive ancient timber beams. The light catches on the dust motes dancing in the air, creating tiny spinning galaxies of silence. But as the beam travels along the dark wood, you spot a strange, almost imperceptible detail high above, tucked into the shadowy recess where the ceiling meets the outermost wall. There is a small, carefully carved wooden bird. It's tiny, perhaps the size of your thumb, and painted a faded, dull red. It is clearly a piece of decoration, but its placement is odd. It's facing inward, away from the wall, staring directly down at the center of the room. You stare at the tiny bird. Why is it there? It sparks a memory of an incomprehensible academic debate from the Meiji Restoration era. Scholars argued about the function of boundary birds, Sakai no Tori. These small, carved figures were sometimes placed in the eaves of older, deep country homes. One theory suggested they were protection, a charm to scare away malevolent spirits. But the chilling counter-argument was that they were placed there by families who had sealed a suffering loved one within the walls. The bird's purpose, in this theory, was not to keep spirits out, but to keep one specific spirit in, marking the exact location of the sacrifice so the family could always know where the sound was coming from. A permanent, silent marker of their guilt. You look down at the hollow spot on the wall, then back up at the tiny, faded red bird, staring at that exact location. The 2 points, the spot and the bird, feel geometrically connected, forming a perfect, terrifying line. You reach up, stretching, trying to touch the tiny wooden bird, but it's too high. The act of reaching, however, requires you to put 1 foot down near the corner where you found the flattened mat. As you shift your weight, your foot nudges something incredibly subtle that was lying on the tatami mat. You shine your light down. It is a single, perfectly spherical glass marble. It's old, slightly cloudy glass, and it rests on the dark mat. The color is a deep, unsettling brown red, like dried earth mixed with rust. You bend down and pick it up. It is heavier than expected and icy cold. But as you hold it, you notice the most terrifying detail. This isn't just an old toy. The surface of the marble is not smooth. It is covered in tiny, almost microscopic scratches, forming thin, parallel lines. It looks exactly like something that had been rolled back and forth, over and over again, in the same tiny, repetitive path, for an impossibly long time. You realize those tiny, frantic movements are what flattened the circular spot on the tatami mat. This small, cold marble was the source of the circular depression. The sudden silence snaps. It returns, not with a whimper, but with a sharp, clear, single sound right next to your ear. It is a tiny, giggling sound, a soft, feminine, utterly chilling sound of delight. It is so close it feels like someone breathed the laughter directly onto the side of your neck. You recoil instantly, dropping the marble with a clatter. It rolls rapidly across the tatami, stopping exactly at the edge of the hollow patch on the wall. The giggle stops instantly, replaced by a soft, sustained sigh of contentment. You look at the marble, the wall, and the silence. The entity, whatever it is now playing with you. It is aware, and it is waiting. The glass marble rests innocently against the wall, but its presence feels like a direct taunt. You can almost feel the phantom weight of the child pressing against the plaster. Amused by your reaction, the silence that follows the giggle is not peaceful. It is expectant, charged with a thrilling, terrifying energy. Did you notice how your breathing just became shallow, waiting for the next sound? You cautiously take another step back. You must regain control of your emotions. You are in a historical inn, and these are simply old materials reacting to temperature and humidity. The paper doll, a forgotten omamori charm. The marble, a child's lost toy. The faint sound wind. You try to anchor yourself in logic, but the cold scent and the deliberate silence argue against you. You look down at your hand. You realize that the intense fear caused you to sweat, and the chill from the room has made your palm icy cold. You wipe it against your trousers, and as you do, you catch sight of the corner of the futon. Something is resting there, placed neatly on the thick batting, where it was not a moment ago. It is a single, perfectly preserved dried flower. It's a small, white blossom, almost translucent with age, pressed flat. It looks like a shiragiku, a white chrysanthemum, often associated with grief and the dead in Japanese culture. But the chilling detail is that it is not completely dry. Its stem is surprisingly pliable, and the petals, though faded, still have a very faint, sweet, cloying odor, the smell of something recently living, or perhaps something that refuses to die, something that you recall. Another unsettling piece of knowledge related to this very custom of sealing rooms. The incomprehensible academic debate this time centers on the use of grave blossoms haka no hana, It was a local, very remote custom, never fully cataloged, where if a person was to be sealed away, either through necessity or ritual, the surviving family would leave a single flower outside the sealed boundary every morning. The purpose, argued by some historians, was to feed the spirit to provide it with the scent of the living world. The counter theory, the chilling one, suggested the flowers were left to absorb the tears of the sealed person. If the flower was brought inside the sealed space, it was believed the spirit had finally accepted its fate, turning the room into a final, undisputed resting place. You are inside the space, the flower is inside with you, it was not there when you sat down. Well, you think, attempting to lighten the oppressive mood with a dry joke. I appreciate the turn-down service, but I'm not a fan of the floral arrangements. Too much white. You can hear the tremor in your own whispered joke. You look around again, thought you need to find the source of the hollowness. The child's presence, the marble, the flower, they all confirm that this corner of the room is the nexus. You return to the wall and trace the faint outline you noticed earlier. The rectangular shape is about the size of a small door or a window, perfectly positioned, low to the ground, exactly where a small child might press against it. You press your ear hard against the plaster. You don't hear the crying anymore, but you hear something else, something very faint that feels like it's vibrating through the bone in your skull. It is a soft, rhythmic, scratching sound. Scratch, pause, scratch, pause. It is too slow to be a rat, too deliberate to be the wind. It sounds like a small, sharp fingernail, tracing the same line over and over again on the wood beneath the plaster. It is a slow, endless labor. You suddenly recall the bound paper doll, still nestled in your pocket. The figure was tightly bound, its arms held rigid to its sides. But what if the binding was not a curse, but a necessity? What if the binding was meant to stop the hands from doing this endless, pathetic scratching? The realization sends a wave of nausea through you. The thought of this endless, solitary task, performed in the dark, silent space behind the plaster, is worse than any sudden scream. It's the horror of perpetual, patient isolation. You close your eyes for a moment, trying to filter out the sound, trying to convince yourself it's just the sound of a settling building. But you can feel the rhythmic scratch, pause, scratch, pause resonating through your own hand, which you have instinctively placed over your ear. When you open your eyes, you look across the room and notice a new, terrifying, mysterious detail. The door you meticulously latched with the heavy iron bolt is now slightly, barely, ajar. Just a millimeter of black space showing between the jamb and the wood. You know with absolute certainty that you secured it. It would have required a massive effort to move that bolt. Yet it has been moved, silently, without a sound. And in that tiny sliver of black space, you are sure you see the edge of something very thin, very dark, and utterly still, watching you. The sight of the door, barely ajar, is a pure jolt of adrenaline. You know you secured that bolt. It was heavy and required effort. Yet, there it is, a hairline fracture in your perceived safety, a sliver of black silence where the hall meets the room. And in that sliver, the dark, still edge of something watching. You stand there, frozen, the rhythmic scratching from the wall suddenly feeling less important than the silent invasion at the door. Are you reaching for the key in your pocket? Or are you paralyzed? You manage a single, shaky breath. Your mind races through potential explanations. Foundation settling, a massive gust of wind, a faulty lock. But you know the truth. This inn, this ryokan, is actively acknowledging your presence. The sound from the corner resumes, but the rhythm has subtly changed. It's no longer the patient, endless scratching. Now it is a short, rapid flurry of movement, scratch, 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 followed by a long, drawn-out pause, a sound of frustrated effort. It's almost angry. It's as if the entity realizes your attention has been diverted by the door. You tear your gaze away from the door and move back to the corner, needing to address the immediate, tangible source of the sound. You refuse to be drawn into a game of fear played between 2 points. You will confront the wall. You press your palm against the small, hollow rectangle on the plaster, the place where you could feel the vibration. The plaster feels icy and oddly thin, like a layer of dried skin over bone. You can hear the scratching clearer now, right under your palm. It is sharp, desperate, trying to find purchase. You look closely at the plaster surface, shining the flashlight beam across it at a low angle, and you see it a single, thin, dark crack that begins near the floor and rises vertically about 5 inches. The crack itself is disturbing, but the chilling detail is what is emerging from it. It's a small puff of dust, but not dry dust. It is a plume of dark, fine-grained earth soil that is slowly, continuously pushing its way out of the crack. It is as if the space behind the plaster is not just a room, but a small, narrow grave. And something inside is kicking the dirt away. This detail immediately connects to a horrifying local historical event, a true story of unjust darkness that gives context to the sorrow you hear. This region has ancient ties to the Tsuchi Ningyo, or dirt doll, curse. In the 18th century, there was a specific plague outbreak, not of disease, but of crippling, sudden depression that swept through a small village. A traveling exorcist convinced the villagers that the illness was caused by the spirits of unbaptized children who had been buried too shallowly in the earth. The cure was a horrifying process. The family had to dig up the remains of their lost child, place them in a small, narrow wooden box, a dirt doll box, and seal the box into the wall of the main dwelling, burying the box into the earth of the house itself, a final, absolute form of containment. This was done to give the spirit a permanent home within the family structure, preventing it from wandering. It was a terrifying, true, historical horror. And now you are staring at earth being extruded from the wall where a child's mournful sound originates. You feel a wave of intense dizziness, the air suddenly too thin to breathe. You lean against the opposite wall for support, putting your head in your hands. You try to use one of your quick, internal jokes. I specifically requested a room without exposed foundations. My compliments to the earthworm, though clearly persistent. But it's a failure. The reality is too sharp. You know that behind that thin plaster, something is trapped in the earth, and it is trying to push its way into your room. You look down at the floor, needing something else to focus on. Your eyes land on your bag, lying innocently beside the futon, and there is a final, strange, mysterious detail that brings a quiet, profound dread. The black thread. Remember the paper doll you found, tightly bound with a single thin strand of black thread? You look at the paper doll, still crumpled in your pocket. The thread is gone. It is not loose in your pocket. It is simply absent from the bound figure. And now, lying right beside your bag on the clean tatami mat, is a single long strand of that black thread. It is stretched perfectly taut, running in a straight line from the door that is slightly ajar all the way to the corner of the room, stopping exactly where the earth is slowly pushing out of the wall. It is a perfect, uninterrupted line of connection. It wasn't a curse keeping the doll bound, it was a leash. And now, the leash has been unknotted, and the thread has been stretched between the opening and the grave. The silence in the room is not the quiet of waiting. It is the quiet of tethering. Something has followed the thread from the door to the wall, and now it is ready. The scratching stops entirely. The room is utterly silent once more. But this silence is filled with the sensation of being watched from two different directions: the gap in the door and the crack in the wall. You are centered in the middle of a vast, unmoving trap. The taut black thread stretches across the tatami like an antenna, silently connecting the slightly ajar door to the crack in the wall. You can't look away from it. It's the physical manifestation of the terror, a line drawn between the entry point and the source of the trapped sorrow. Can you feel the cold air moving along that thread, like a chill current? You are trapped in the standoff between the 2 points. You decide the immediate, tangible threat is the wall. The door is only an invitation. The wall is the origin. You slowly move toward the corner, your eyes fixed on the narrow fissure where the earth is still slowly, minutely pushing through. You place your hand not on the plaster, but on the wooden frame surrounding the hollow rectangle. The wood is old and rough. You press gently, and you hear a soft, dry creak from deep within the structure. It's the sound of ancient wood complaining. But this time, it is immediately followed by a terrifying, mysterious detail, a tiny, muffled sound of a sigh of relief from behind the wall. It's the sound of a small lung finding comfort in your presence, a sound of acceptance. You realize you didn't just touch the wall, you leaned into it, you pressed against its boundary, and the entity interpreted that as a reciprocal action, a sign of engagement. It's not just scared, it's profoundly, desperately lonely, and it thinks you've come to join it. The sigh is followed by a completely new sound, a soft, delicate tapping. It's not violent or demanding. It sounds like the gentle tapping of a small child's fingertip against the inner surface of the plaster. Tap, 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 tap. It's almost playful. A child testing the thin barrier between you. You try to rationalize the terror with a grim joke. I really shouldn't encourage them. Now they think they found a new playmate. I'm too old for hide and seek in a sealed room. Thank you. But the joke falters, because the tapping is now rhythmic, and it sounds like it is following the slow beat of your own pulse. You shine your flashlight directly at the wall, right above the faint outline of the sealed rectangle. You are looking for a weakness, a way to peer inside. The plaster is smooth, seamless, except for that one crack near the floor. You move the beam slowly, meticulously, up the wall, and then you find it an even more chilling detail. Near the top edge of the sealed rectangle, the paper-thin layer of plaster is not cracked. but translucent. It's a very small area, perhaps the size of a thumbnail, where the plaster has become so thin, so fragile with age, that if you hold the flashlight right against it, you can almost see through to the dark, narrow space beyond. You hesitate, but do you dare press the lens right against the wall? You know that to do so will confirm the horrifying reality of what lies on the other side. But the need to see, the terrifying compulsion to resolve the sound, overwhelms your fear. You press the glass of the flashlight firmly against the translucent spot. The light illuminates the internal space, but it's mostly shadow. It's an incredibly narrow space, a small gap between the two wooden frames. It looks like a coffin stood on end. And then you see a flash of color. It's not a face or a figure or anything recognizably human. It is a swatch of deep, dark crimson. Its fabric, heavy and old, pressed tightly against the inner wooden lining of the sealed space. It looks like the fabric of a child's silk kimono. It is utterly still. This brings to mind a true historical horror event from the early medieval period, tied to the ritual of the living reliquary. This was a terrifying, little documented practice among isolated mountain ascetic cults. If a child was born with a severe, incurable illness, they were sometimes seen not as a victim, but as a pure spirit destined for early sanctification. The horrifying custom was to seal them in a dark, narrow room, often with one of their most precious silk garments. The silk was meant to absorb their pure essence and become a permanent, sacred relic, a living reliquary for the village. The key detail was that the child was often sealed while wearing a crimson kimono, the color meant to symbolize the life they were sacrificing for the community. The practice was brutal, but it was done with meticulous religious devotion. The tapping stops immediately. The sigh of relief is replaced by a slow, soft drag sound, like silk shifting against wood, right behind the spot where you are peering. You quickly pull the flashlight back, plunging the room back into relative darkness. Your heart is pounding so hard it feels like your ribs will crack. The terror isn't that something is trapped. The terror is that it is moving toward the light you provided. You look over at the door, the one that is still barely ajar, connected to the wall by that taut black thread. You suddenly realize the meaning of the thread. It wasn't a tether from the door to the wall. It was a line drawn by the entity, marking the two ways it can enter or exit its perpetual prison. You whisper to the room, a desperate plea disguised as a joke. "Okay, you win. I'll take the silk. Just, please, stop tapping. I'm trying to sleep." But the silence that answers you is too heavy, too complete. And you know, absolutely, that the sound of silk dragging on wood is moving closer to the thin plaster. The rhythmic drag sound of the silk, a soft shh, shh, has replaced the tapping. It's moving slowly along the inner face of the wall, and the sound seems to be zeroing in on the thin, translucent patch where you held the flashlight. You back away further, until you feel the cold, solid wood of the tansu cabinet pressing against your spine. You feel exposed, centered between the hungry silence of the door and the moving sorrow of the wall. You whisper a nervous joke, the sound barely escaping your lips. "I think I just gave them a target beacon. Note to self, do not illuminate the ancient prison walls." You look at the dark corner. You realize that the silk fabric is moving not just toward the light, but toward the crack near the floor. The fissure where the fine earth is still slowly sifting out. Whatever is wearing that crimson kimono is trying to reach the outside, to reach the tatami floor where the marble once lay and where the black thread now stretches. You quickly reach into your pocket, pulling out the small bound paper doll. Its arms were pinned, a little flat figure of paralysis. You look at it, then at the wall. Was the binding meant to keep the spirit from moving? Or was it meant to keep the doll from being released? With trembling hands, you try to unknot the thin black thread. It's impossible. The knots are too tight, too numerous, and your fingers are slick with cold sweat. You realize that the thread on the doll wasn't lost. It was transferred. The thread now stretched across the floor is the original binding, carefully and deliberately removed from the figure and laid out as a path. You throw the paper doll onto the mat, away from the path of the thread, a desperate, futile attempt to break the magical circuit. The silence. It is replaced by a sound that makes your entire body lock up a soft, wet sniffle. It is right behind the plaster now, so close it feels like a damp breath against the wood. It is a raw, heartbreaking sound of pure, concentrated loneliness. You can't move. You are waiting for the next sound, the sound that will confirm the proximity of the entity. But the entity is more patient. It simply holds that intense, weeping stillness, waiting for you to make the next move. This terrifying intimacy brings to mind a strange, mysterious detail, often recounted in the folklore of sealed-off spaces. Villagers believed that in the moment of greatest fear, the trapped spirit could perform the voice transfer koe utsushi. The sound you heard was not just a sniffle. It was the spirit attempting to implant its own desperate, trapped emotion into you, the listener. The goal wasn't to scare you away, but to make you feel the isolation so profoundly that you would be compelled to unseal the barrier, to release the sorrow because it had become your own. You shake your head, trying to clear the sudden, intense wave of profound sadness that washes over you. Are you suddenly feeling overwhelmingly lonely, even though you know you're not alone? That is the spirit's voice working on you. You need a hard anchor in reality. You look away from the wall and your eye falls on the shoji screen again, the one sealed with the thick, dark paper. You move toward it, hoping to find a small crack, a tiny opening to the outside air. As you approach, you notice a final, chilling detail on the shoji that you missed before. The dark paper covering the window is not smooth. It is covered in faint, small indentations. They are not random. They are arranged in precise, repetitive patterns. You realize they are the imprints of tiny, perfectly round objects. They are the repeated press marks of the glass marble. For countless hours, days, or years, the child inside had pressed their marble against the paper barrier, rolling it along the surface, attempting to draw pictures with pressure, marking their existence against the paper that sealed them away from the light. This is the true horror of the isolation, not the supernatural power, but the mundane, endless patience of a lonely child waiting. You manage a shaky, dark joke, your voice a hoarse whisper. Well, that's just poor ventilation. And the art needs work. Someone needs to teach them about perspective. Suddenly, the sniffing stops. The wall is utterly silent. Then, From the shoji screen, from the very spot where you are standing, a new sound begins. It is the soft, rhythmic whimper you heard at the beginning of the night. But now it is clean, unmuffled, and piercingly clear. It sounds as if the child is standing right behind the thin paper of the screen, weeping, having finally moved from the back wall to the sealed window. It followed the path of the marble's loneliness, realizing that the window, where the light should be, is a more suitable place to wait. You are now standing face to face with the sorrow, separated only by a paper-thin barrier. You feel a cold, damp draft on your cheek that smells overwhelmingly of dried earth and the sweet, cloying scent of the grave blossom. The whimper is clear, raw, and close. It's vibrating the paper of the shoji screen, placing the source of the sorrow right in front of you. You are staring at the paper and the rhythmic, quiet sobbing is so immediate it feels like your own head is vibrating. The damp, earthy cold that accompanies the sound is overwhelming. Can you feel that wetness? That cold on your face? You take a desperate, stumbling step back, your heart hammering against your ribs. The shift from the back wall to the front screen is too deliberate, too fast and fiest. It's proof that the entity is not a static memory. It is a moving presence that is now fully aware of your location. You look down at the tatami. The black thread, which once led from the slightly ajar door to the back wall, is now subtly shifted. It runs from the door, across the floor, and ends exactly at the base of the shoji screen where the crying originates. The path has been completed. The entity has followed its tether. You try to focus on a detail, anything mundane, to stop the panic. You glance at the tansu cabinet again, the place that feels the most solid, the most real. You remember the drawer you left slightly ajar, the one containing the small wooden box with the ancient coin and the looped silk. You need to check it. You need to confirm that not everything in this room is moving or changing. You cautiously approach the cabinet and pull the drawer open completely. The scent of cedar is stronger here. The box is still there, resting on the silk loop. But as you lift the box, you notice the most terrifying, mysterious detail. The silk loop is gone. It is no longer coiled underneath the box. Instead, resting precisely where the loop used to be, is a small, carefully folded strip of dark, faded fabric. You pick it up. It feels smooth, cold, and impossibly thin, the same kind of fabric you imagined the crimson kimono to be made of. This is a cuff strip, a thin, vertical piece of fabric that would be used to finish the edge of a small sleeve. The strip is stained, not with the brown of age, but with a deep, unsettling crimson blotch. Right in the center, it looks like a concentrated, dried tear stain, or perhaps a fingerprint. You realize the chilling sequence the entity moved. The thread followed, and it left a piece of its garment in the drawer as a horrifying exchange. It took the silk loop, the symbol of endless return, and gave you a fragment of its crimson dress, a symbol of its sacrifice. You recall a dark, true historical horror event that happened in the region during the Tokugawa period. It was the ritual of the child's kimono, in cases of families who lost a child to illness, but were too poor to afford a formal burial. They would perform a mock burial, using the child's last worn kimono as a stand-in for the body. The horrifying custom was to leave a small piece of that garment in a place where the child used to hide or play, believing that this would draw the spirit's essence into the fabric, making the spirit portable. The family would then carry the cloth fragment with them, allowing the spirit to remain tethered to the living, not the earth. You are now holding a piece of a child's ritual garment, a piece of a portable sorrow. You try to force a grim, light joke, whispering to the empty room, "Well, now I'm accessorized." But this crimson really clashes with the tatami aesthetic. And is it dry clean only? The forced levity immediately dissolves into the cold dread. You look back at the shoji screen. The weeping has momentarily stopped again. But now, you hear a new sound from behind the paper, a soft, sustained rattling. It is irregular, high-pitched, and hollow. It sounds exactly like a small collection of dried seeds, or perhaps small, ancient bones being gently shaken in a tightly closed wooden container. The rattling is coming from the center of the screen, right at the height of a small child's hand. It is not aggressive, but utterly persistent. It is a child, trapped behind the paper, now shaking a toy. A small, dry, horrifying toy that makes the sound of death. You look down at the cuff strip in your hand, then back at the door that is still cracked open, and finally at the paper screen where the rattling continues. The entity is confirming its presence, playing its endless, lonely game. You are its new audience, and you might not survive the show. The hollow, rhythmic rattling from behind the shoji screen is insistent. It's a high, dry sound that contrasts sharply with the wet sniffles and soft silk drags you heard earlier. The sound is utterly chilling because it implies an object, a small, enclosed box or rattle being shaken by a child who is now standing inches from your face, separated only by thin paper. Can you visualize the small, translucent hand gripping that rattle right now? You cautiously take another step back, your gaze locked on the screen. The rattling suddenly stops, replaced by another, more profound sound. A single, delicate tinkle, like a tiny, ancient bell being tapped once. This single, clear sound snaps your mind back to the terrifying mystery of the inn's deeper history. You remember the incomprehensible academic debate you came across regarding the ritual of the soundkeeper Oto no Mamori. This was a remote, obscure custom concerning sealed sacrifices. The theory went that the families, overcome by guilt, would place a small, personalized object with the sealed spirit, often a tiny silver or brass bell attached to the child's most beloved toy. The spirit was meant to shake this object only when it felt truly forgotten, or when an outsider entered the dwelling. The bell's tinkle was a warning to the family: I am still here, and I am lonely. The chilling debate. Some scholars argued that the sound was not a warning to the family, but a bait for new spirits, an invitation to join the captive sorrow, thus making the sealed space stronger. The single tinkle fades into the cold air. You realize that the child is now directly communicating its state of awareness. It knows you are an outsider, and it is ringing its tiny bell for you. You look down at the floor again, needing to ground yourself in the physical details of the room. Your eyes fall upon the black thread, taut and still, running from the ajar door to the base of the shoji. You notice a disturbing, mysterious detail right in the middle of the thread. It is a single, glistening drop of water. It rests precisely on the black thread, shimmering in the faint light. It is too large to be a normal condensation drop, and it defies gravity, holding its perfect spherical shape on the thin fiber. It looks exactly like a tear, a perfect, clear, concentrated tear, and it is slowly, almost imperceptibly, rolling along the length of the thread, moving from the shoji toward the slightly open door. The tear is following the path of the thread, just as the entity did. It is a slow, silent procession of sorrow moving toward the escape route. You feel a sudden, intense wave of profound pity. The same deep sadness you experienced when the entity performed its voice transfers, but you shake it off quickly. This is not pity. This is the spirit's influence trying to compel you to help it. If the tear reaches the door, what follows it, you manage a shaky, internal joke, your voice a ragged whisper. Well, at least the plumbing is still working somewhere in this old place. Though I'd prefer if the emotional drainage wasn't so literal. You have to break the line. You have to destroy the physical connection that is guiding the sorrow out of its prison. You pull out the small penknife you carry for emergencies. It feels heavy and clumsy in your hand. You kneel down quickly, but silently, placing the cold steel of the blade against the taut black thread, right next to the glistening tear. Do you have the courage to cut it? You know that severing the thread will either halt the process and save you, or violently snap the entity's tether, causing an immediate, uncontrollable reaction. Uncontrollable. You close your eyes and bring the knife down. The thread snaps with a sound that is impossibly loud, a sharp, high twang that echoes through the silence of the room. The glistening tear, now unrestrained, flies off the thread and splatters against the wall next to the door. And from behind the shoji screen, the entity gives a single, sharp scream. It is not the full, ear-splitting scream of a ghost, but the choked, desperate cry of a small child who has had its last connection to the world violently severed. The paper screen instantly bulges outward at the center, as if a small, concentrated force has been applied from the inside. The paper doesn't rip, but stretches taut, forming the unmistakable, terrifying shape of a small, clenched fist. The fabric of the shoji is now molded around the tiny, furious hand, held in perfect, rigid stillness, right at eye level. You have broken the line, but you have also infuriated the captive. The game is over. And now the physical presence is right there. The sharp twang of the thread snapping still rings in the deep silence, followed by that heart-wrenching, choked scream. The paper screen, bulging outward into the rigid form of a small, clenched fist, is the most terrifying thing you have ever seen. It is no longer just a sound. It is an undeniable, physical projection of fury and presence. You stare at the fist. It's small, perhaps no bigger than a teacup, but it is held with an immense, unmoving pressure that seems to threaten to burst through the paper at any second. The air around the screen grows intensely cold, drawing all the warmth from your face. Can you feel that cold? Sharp air pulling the breath from your lungs. You manage a shaky, weak joke, whispering toward the terrifying shape. Well, that was a disproportionate response. I'd give you a 5 out of 10 for the papercraft, but a 0 for customer service. The joke is immediately swallowed by the cold air. The fist remains, a frozen tableau of desperation. Then, very slowly, almost impossibly slowly, the knuckles begin to rotate. The bulge in the paper doesn't move forward or back. It pivots on its axis, turning the orientation of the fist so the small, rigid thumb is now pointing directly at the floor, specifically at the spot where the black thread was severed. It is a silent, profound gesture of blame and accusation. You look down at the severed thread, then back at the accusing fist. You realize the terrifying truth. You are not just the latest guest. You are the true owner of this tragic exchange. By cutting the thread, you didn't free yourself. You took the entity's last means of escape and claimed ownership of its confinement. This leads your mind to an unsettling, mysterious detail concerning the inn's old records. You remember reading about a guest in the 1930s, a traveling scholar, who wrote a cryptic journal entry. He claimed that the true horror of the Omiya Ryokan was not the ghost, but the contract of the waiting child. He theorized that the spirit was not bound by the walls, but by a psychological contract. It was waiting for someone to finally acknowledge its silent sacrifice and, in doing so, take the burden of the waiting. The entity was ready to leave, but only if the burden was voluntarily accepted, by interacting with the doll, the marble, the tear, and finally severing the thread. You have signed the contract. You are now the keeper of the weight. The fist begins to tremble violently. Not a gentle shaking, but a deep, aggressive spasm. The paper around the knuckles creases and tears, ever so slightly, with a dry, ripping sound. And then, from behind the paper, you hear a new, terrifying sound, a soft, sustained hiss. It is a sound of pure, concentrated resentment, a sibilant noise that seems to scrape against the inside of your skull. It is the sound of a small, trapped child who has finally been betrayed. You have to break the contract. You have to put the focus back on the history, on the reason this sorrow exists, to depersonalize the horror. You look around the room for any other item, any other clue that can shift the focus away from your own actions. Your eyes land on the wall where the crying originated. The small crack is still there, still leaking the fine, dark earth. You look at the dark wooden frame of the hollow rectangle, and you notice something you missed before. Etched deep into the wood of the frame, right above the crack, are two perfect finger notches. They are small indentations, worn smooth by an endless, repetitive action, exactly the place where a small, tiny hand would grasp the frame if it were trying to pull itself out of the earth-filled space. This physical sign of endless, futile effort instantly reminds you of a true historical horror event from the early 1600s, the Mountain Famine Murders. During a period of extreme hardship, this area experienced unprecedented levels of child starvation. The truly horrifying detail was the widespread practice of burying the dead in the dwelling walls, not just children, but the old, the weak, as a means of containing the hunger and ensuring their spirit wouldn't wander out to consume the family's meager stores. Those who were sealed in the walls, even if deceased, were often left with their hands free, their fingers grasping the last bit of air, leading to the terrifying folk stories of grasping spirits Tsukami Yurei, whose final, desperate clutch left permanent marks on the walls. You look at the finger notches, worn smooth by that final, desperate grasp. You realize that the entity in the shoji screen, the one that hissed at you, is simply the projection of the spirit's pain. But the real, eternal sorrow is right there, in the back wall, in the finger notches of the real trapped body, trying for centuries to find its final exit. The hissing from the shoji stops. The terror is momentarily split. The fury at the front, and the silent, endless desperation at the back. You are caught between them, the keeper of the contract, you stand suspended between 2 points of terror, the furious, physical presence of the fist at the shoji screen, and the silent, geological sorrow marked by the finger notches in the back wall. The hiss has ceased, replaced by a strained, cold silence where every breath you take feels like a disruption. Are you trying to decide which terror is more immediate? The one that accuses you, or the one that is forever in pain? You choose the passive terror, the wall. You approach the back corner again, drawn by the stark reality of the finger notches etched into the wood frame. You realize the true horror is not the ghost's power, but the sheer agonizing duration of its confinement. You run your fingers over the 2 smooth indentations. They are worn down not by violence, but by repetition, by the final, desperate hope of a child trying to pull itself out of the earth-filled box. You whisper a low, dark joke into the terrifying space. They really need to invest in better grip tape. This isn't going to hold, but the joke is a shield, and it's starting to fail. As your hand rests on the cold wood, you feel the faint vibration again, not the excited rhythm of tapping, but a slow, heavy pulse. It is the heartbeat of the buried sorrow. Your eyes drift down to the floor, where the loose tatami mat covers the seam. You notice another subtle, yet profound, mysterious detail. Right at the very edge of the tatami, where it meets the wood trim, there is a tiny, almost invisible seam of black lacquer. It is not a decorative trim. It looks like a meticulous, patient sealing done with a brush. It forms a perfect, unbroken line, encircling the entire edge of the mat in the corner. This lacquer seal connects to the terrifying historical event you recalled earlier, the mountain famine murders and the grasping spirits. You suddenly remember the full, horrifying detail of that practice. The sealing of the victim inside the wall was only the first step. The family would then meticulously paint a containment ring, shizume no wa, around the edges of the floor and any seams nearby, using a dark, earth-based lacquer. The horrifying custom was based on the belief that if the spirit managed to pull itself out of the sealed box and into the room, this ring would confuse it. It would mistake the black lacquer boundary for the final border of the living world, causing it to endlessly crawl along the perimeter, searching for a seam that wasn't there, and thus preventing it from venturing into the main house. You are standing inside the containment ring. You realize the implication with a jolt of pure, icy dread The spirit in the back wall did pull itself out of the box long ago. It is not confined to the walls. It is confined to this corner. The finger notches are a scar of its initial escape, and the black lacquer ring is its final, successful prison. You immediately look down at the tatami. You take a sudden, sharp step away from the corner, making sure your feet do not cross that fine, black lacquer line. The movement triggers a response. From the shoji screen, the small, rigid fist remains fixed in its accusing posture. But now, a new sound begins to emerge from behind the paper, a slow, sustained, dragging sound on the floor. It is not the soft shh of silk this time. It is a rougher sound, like something heavier than fabric being dragged across a wooden floor. You look at the shoji. The source of the sound is low, near the floor, but it is not coming from behind the paper. It is coming from inside the screen's frame itself. The sound of the drag moves horizontally, slowly, tracing the bottom edge of the paper panel. It's methodical and persistent, accompanied by the occasional soft clunk of something rigid hitting the vertical wood supports. It is now performing the same perimeter crawl that the sealed spirit did, except this time, the entity in the shoji screen is tracing the path of its silent, long-dead counterpart, learning the geography of the trap. It is moving along the bottom edge of its own prison. You stand frozen, listening to the heavy, abrasive sound of the drag. You are caught between the confined spirit who is trying to get out the back wall and the furious spirit who is moving along the trap, the shoji screen. You manage one final, desperate joke, your voice a barely audible tremor. I'm sorry, but I didn't sign up for the find the exit scavenger hunt. And frankly, your dragging technique needs a lot of work. The dragging stops. There is a final, heavy thump as the object stops moving. The room is silent, save for the intense, shivering cold. And in that cold, you realize with absolute certainty that the two entities, the one confined by the lacquer and the one confined by the paper, have now communicated. The silent wall has shown the furious screen the way of the trap. The heavy thump that ended the dragging sound echoes in the intense, chilling silence. Both points of terror, the back wall with its history of desperation, and the shoji screen with its projection of fury, are now utterly still. You are acutely aware that the entities are no longer playing separately. They have communicated. The silent wall has passed on the grim knowledge of the trap, and the furious screen is absorbing it. You stand motionless, careful to remain outside the perimeter of the black lacquer line, realizing that the boundary you must respect is not the wall, but the floor itself. Can you hear the absolute stillness of the air? It's a silence filled with calculation. You try to move your mind away from the physical traps and back to the items that were used to bait you. You look down at your hand, still holding the small, crimson-stained cuff strip of the kimono. It feels cold, smooth, and oddly precious. You remember the horrifying historical detail this fragment was meant to make the spirit portable. Tethering it to the living, by taking it, you have essentially accepted a piece of the containment contract. This object, the piece of silk, is a profound, mysterious detail in itself. It is the color of sacrifice, the token of the spirit's suffering. You bring it close to your face. It still carries that faint, cloying sweetness, the scent of the grave blossom mixed with the dry scent of old earth. You decide to offer it back, to reject the contract. You move slowly toward the shoji screen, the one still bearing the rigid, angry shape of the tiny fist. You hold the crimson cuff strip out towards the paper. "I am not the keeper of your weight," you whisper, your voice thin and raw. "I reject the burden." As you move the strip close to the paper, the chilling detail happens. The stiff, hard paper around the clenched fist suddenly relaxes. The tension holding the shape melts away instantly. The paper is flat again, but it retains a faint crease where the fist was. The anger is gone. The intense cold around the shoji screen immediately lessens. The air suddenly feels less suffocating, less pulled. The silence remains, but the quality has changed from a silence of fury to a silence of profound, exhausted grief. You gently place the crimson cuff strip onto the tatami mat, right at the base of the shoji. You have successfully led the entity away from anger, but you have not defeated the sorrow. You look around the room one last time. The finger notches in the back wall are still there. The black lacquer line is still drawn, and the dark space behind the paper screen still holds a soul. But the tension has eased, replaced by a deep, reflective calm. You realize that your final act must be one of pure acknowledgement, not aggression. You sink down onto the futon, letting the soft material support your suddenly weary body. You close your eyes. You are no longer trying to solve the riddle or escape the trap. You are simply listening to the quiet space, feeling the weight of the history around you. The overwhelming dread begins to recede, replaced by a profound, gentle sadness. The metallic scent of blood and old coin fades, replaced by the faint, earthy sweetness of the grave blossom. The air, though still cool, no longer pierces your bones. It feels soft, almost comforting. You realize that the entity, now calmed, is no longer a malicious presence, but a deeply, profoundly lonely memory. It only wanted to be seen, to have its sacrifice acknowledged before returning to its eternal rest. The heavy silence of the room, once a weapon, now feels like a warm, dark blanket drawn over a tragic history. You remember the sound of the wind outside the ryokan, the sound of the valley fog. You recall the smooth, cold touch of the marble, the dry crunch of the paper doll. You focus on the sensory details of the living world, pushing the fear gently aside. You are an observer, a listener, a temporary witness. The sorrow of the little inn is ancient and fixed, but your journey through it is nearly over. You have survived the night, not by fighting the horror, but by acknowledging the grief. You let your mind drift, focusing on the dark comfort of the room. The terror is gone, leaving only the poignant, reflective truth of a long, long wait finally being seen. You can almost hear the soft rush of the river far down in the valley, the natural sounds of the world reasserting themselves, carrying the sound of the last, quiet tears away. You are safe now, cradled by the history you chose to confront. The journey ends not in a scream, but in a deep, profound sigh. You lie there, still and heavy, the terror having drained out of you, leaving only the residue of deep sadness. The room feels immense now, not claustrophobic. It is a chamber dedicated to a long, lonely memory. and you are its current, quiet caretaker. The silence is no longer an active predator. It is simply the deep quiet of the mountain and the old wood. Can you feel the weight of the futon, the solid ground beneath you, a comforting anchor after the storm? You look up at the dark timber beams of the ceiling. The tiny faded red wooden bird is still perched up there, the boundary bird, silently watching. But now its gaze feels less like an accusation and more like a permanent vigil. It is a fixed, quiet witness to a tragedy that unfolded centuries ago. Your mind drifts back to the history, the sealing of the children, the containment rings, the endless patience of the grief. This reflective calm allows you to process another chilling detail. The subject of an incomprehensible academic debate that often plagued scholars studying rural Japanese folklore, the theory of the oni of abandoned spaces. Oni, often translated as demons or ogres, were more complex in ancient belief. The debate centered on the nature of sorrowful spirits in abandoned dwellings. The dominant theory was that these spirits were simply yurei, ghosts of the unjustly dead, but the chilling counter-theory suggested that if a room was sealed and a spirit was forced to wait for a century or more, the sheer concentrated isolation and suffering could transform the spirit not into a yurei, but into a new, localized type of oni. Not an aggressive, fire-breathing demon, but an oni whose sole purpose was geometric maintenance to keep the prison intact, to ensure the boundaries were never crossed, and to enforce the suffering of its own confinement. You realize that this is why the sorrow had a physical presence. The oni of this inn was the dark lacquer line, the heavy shoji screen, the taut black thread. It wasn't trying to escape to freedom. It was trying to transfer the maintenance of its prison to you. Well, you whisper, managing a final, truly dark joke in this reflective tone. At least the management is very hands-on about maintaining the historical integrity of the containment protocol. 5 stars for consistency, 0 for ethical treatment. You turn your attention to the tansu cabinet again. You remember the small wooden box inside, the one with the rusted coin. You slowly rise and walk to the drawer, pulling it open. The scent of cedar is pure and clean now. You lift the box out, you open the lid. The rusted iron coin lies on the wood base, untouched. But you notice a profound, mysterious detail that wasn't there before the black thread, the piece you severed, the piece that held the glistening tear, is now resting inside the box. It is not neatly placed. It is simply lying there, curled around the coin, as if the coin itself magnetically drew the fragment back to its source. The coin, the relic of weight, has absorbed the final piece of the tension. This small detail, the thread returning to the box, gives you a final, quiet truth. The sorrow does not leave the inn. It only transfers its tools to the waiting space. The boundary is unbroken. You gently close the box and slide the drawer shut. As you stand there, in the deepest quiet of the night, you hear a new, unidentifiable sound that floats in from the distant, damp air. It is very faint, high-pitched, and slightly out of tune. It is the sound of a shamisen, a 3-stringed Japanese instrument being played softly, melancholically, somewhere far away, perhaps miles down the foggy mountain road. It is a lonely, haunting melody that speaks of distant sorrow and deep historical memory. It is a beautiful sound. And as you listen, you feel the final fragments of fear dissolve. The music is an anchor to the outside world. a reminder that the world continues, and that your role here is only to witness the end of the night. The distant, melancholic strains of the shamisen are your final link to reality, a fragile melody that seems to rise out of the valley fog. You listen, letting the music wash over the edges of the room's intense history. It is a lonely sound, but it is a living sound, a sound of continuation, not confinement. Can you feel your muscles finally relax? The deep tension starting to melt from your shoulders and neck? You walk slowly over to the shoji screen, the one that so recently bore the terrifying impression of a furious, small fist. You kneel down and run your hand lightly over the surface of the paper. It is smooth now, completely flat, though you can still faintly see the faint, dry tear where the paper almost split. You notice a profound, mysterious detail at the bottom of the screen, where the crimson cuff strip was resting. There is now a faint, damp stain on the tatami mat beneath the paper. It is not the dark, earthy stain you saw before. This stain is clear, like fresh water, but it is slowly spreading outwards in a perfect radial pattern, moving away from the shoji screen in an unstoppable, slow circle. It is a silent, unhurried spread. You realize the frightening implication when you rejected the burden of the weight and offered the crimson cloth. The entity accepted your acknowledgement, but it left behind a final offering, the release of its last tears. The spreading dampness is the physical manifestation of the spirit's final, quiet surrender. It is spreading, not along the trap lines, but in a circle of release, embracing the entire floor of the room. You watch it move, inch by silent inch, a slow motion flood of concentrated sorrow. You recall a curious, chilling piece of local history tied to the ritual of the boundary cloth. During certain rituals of deep cleansing, a cloth was dampened with pure mountain water and placed over a grave or a boundary. The horrifying custom dictated that if the water spread in a perfect, uncontrolled circle, it meant the spirit was not yet ready for peace, but had only accepted a temporary truce, waiting patiently for a new witness, a new keeper to enter the boundary. You manage a final, quiet joke, your voice barely a breath. I think I prefer a thank you note. Honestly, this is a lot of cleanup for a one-night stay. But the truth is, this spreading dampness is beautiful in its symmetry and horrifying in its implication of endless waiting. You look down at your hand again, the one that touched the lacquer-sealed floor, the one that cut the thread. You notice a small, faint, reddish-brown mark on your index finger. It's not blood. It's too deep, too permanent, like a tiny, ancient birthmark that was never there before. You rub it, but it doesn't fade. This is the terrifying signature of the contract. The spirit took the thread, but it left the mark of the crimson kimono on your skin. You are branded. The sound of the shamisen continues its lonely melody. Suddenly, the music is briefly interrupted by a rapid, chilling sound from somewhere outside the room, somewhere in the deep, wooden labyrinth of the inn. It is the sound of footsteps, not a ghost's dragging or a spirit's silent glide, but the rhythmic tap, tap, tap of a living person's shoes, your shoes, walking quickly down the hall, away from your room. The sound is utterly real and terrifyingly misplaced. Are you sure you didn't hear that the brisk measured tap, tap, tap of your own feet, running away down the wooden corridor. You look at the entrance door, the one you had relatched. It is still securely bolted. You look down at the floor. Your own shoes are still there, in the genkin by the door, exactly where you left them when you entered the room. The footsteps continue their retreat, tap, 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 diminishing into the deep silence of the inn, taking with them all sense of rational placement. You realize the horrifying truth. The Oni of the walls, the entity that enforces the boundaries, has just played a final, cold joke. It has sent your projection, your sound, your footsteps, your very identity running away down the hall to ensure that no one will come looking for you. You are sealed in with the sorrow, and the outside world has just been convinced that you successfully left the inn. You are the last guest. You are the only guest. And the night is far from over. The receding tap, tap, tap of your projected footsteps is the ultimate confirmation of your imprisonment. You are sealed, and the outside world has been fooled into believing you departed safely. The inn's boundaries have successfully contained you, and the horror has evolved from a haunting to a psychological trap. Did you feel that small, sharp panic, the realization that your lifeline to the outside world has been deliberately cut? You move quickly, though silently, toward the door. You grasp the heavy iron bolt and try to slide it open. It is stiff, cold, and utterly locked. You had relatched it, but now it feels like the mechanism has seized, or perhaps the wood has swelled around the iron. You push, you pull, but the door remains a heavy, impassable barrier. You manage a single, whispered joke, fueled by frayed nerves. I'll be sure to leave a terrible review about the fire safety and the non-functional emergency exits. You turn back to the room, seeking something, anything that can break the spell. You look at the center of the tatami mat, and you notice a disturbing, mysterious detail. The single long strand of black thread you severed in part 12 is gone from the floor. You had assumed it had been drawn back into the box with the coin, but you didn't check the entire floor. You look carefully, and you find it. It is not gone. It has been meticulously collected and is now draped over the small, low wooden table in the center of the room. It is formed into a perfect, dark spiral, radiating outward from the center of the table. The spiral shape immediately connects to an unsettling, little-known custom from the region's ancient beliefs. This was the ritual of the spirit's coil, Tamashi no Uzu. If a spirit was successfully confined or neutralized, the keeper would lay out a thread in a spiral pattern, believing that the gentle, repetitive geometry would contain any residual energy and ensure the sorrow would slowly be wound back upon itself, neutralized by its own endless cycle. The chilling detail is that the spiral was laid out after the spirit was captured or calmed. The silent presence has arranged the spiral, confirming to you that it has achieved a state of quiescent confinement. But if the sorrow is confined, why are you sealed in? As you stare at the dark spiral, the air in the room suddenly grows thick and heavy. You are standing near the middle of the room, and from the corner of your eye, you catch a rapid, fleeting flicker of movement. It is a shadow, a small, impossibly dark, compact shadow that detaches itself from the ceiling corner near the boundary bird. It doesn't glide or float. It moves in a sudden, jerky, inhuman dash, tracing the edge of the wooden beam above your head. It is gone almost instantly, absorbed back into the deep shadows near the opposite wall. Did you see that rapid, cold movement? It was too quick to be a figment of your imagination, too deliberate to be a trick of the light. This chilling, fleeting sight brings to mind a true historical horror event that often haunted the dreams of locals, the legend of the ceiling dweller Tenjo Yami. After the major famines and purges in the 17th century, many houses were abandoned. Locals swore that the concentrated sorrow and fear of the dead left behind a physical presence, not a ghost, but a shadow of abandonment, a small, highly territorial entity that lived only in the dark corners and beams of abandoned spaces. Its movement was always described as a sudden, frantic dash from one point of concealment to the next. The terrifying function of this shadow was to patrol the prison, ensuring that the trapped sorrow remained trapped, and that any new living presence was neutralized and absorbed into the stillness. You realize the implication: the little child's sorrow is still here. But now, a secondary, territorial horror, the boundary shadow, has been activated by your presence and is guarding the space. It is the inn's silent, final immune system. You quickly drop to your knees, shielding your face with your arms, trying to make yourself as small and unnoticeable as possible. The air is intensely cold around you, and you can hear a faint, high-pitched whine, not from the walls, but from the dark timber beams above. It is the sound of the shadow patrolling the length of its wooden trap, its perimeter. You whisper another desperate joke to yourself, trying to steady your trembling body. I guess this is why they recommend booking a room with natural light, less territorial entities. You wait, rigid and small, while the silent, high-pitched patrol sound continues above you, ensuring that the keeper of the wait remains locked inside with the endless sorrow. The high-pitched whine of the patrolling shadow of abandonment is a continuous, needle-thin sound vibrating in the ancient wood above you. You remain crouched, listening to the territorial entity confirming your containment. It is a sound of pure, unblinking vigilance. Can you feel the weight of the ceiling pressing down on you, held together by the cold geometry of this trap? You realize you must move, but silently, with intention. Your eyes fall on the large tansu cabinet again, the one place in the room that feels the most solid, the most enduring. If there is a final, physical secret to this space, it lies within the cabinet's heavy wood. You crawl slowly towards the cabinet, making sure your movements are smooth, trying to mimic the stillness of the entities around you. The whine above intensifies slightly as you move, a silent acknowledgement that the captive is testing the boundaries. You reach the cabinet and begin to examine the back panel. The side facing the back wall, the wall that bore the finger notches of the grasping spirit. The cabinet itself is an anchor, resting against the boundary of the sorrow. You run your hand over the dark, polished wood of the back panel. It is smooth, but your fingers catch on a slight unevenness near the top edge. You shine your flashlight beam up, and you gasp softly. There, carved into the wood of the cabinet's back, is a profound, mysterious detail. A small, perfect, square hole. It is tiny, perhaps half an inch wide, and entirely out of place on the ornate furniture. It is perfectly aligned with the spot near the ceiling where the boundary bird is perched. You put your eye close to the hole. The beam illuminates the space behind the cabinet, the narrow gap between the tansu and the physical wall of the inn. It is a completely dark, confined space. But through the hole, you can see something else, a final, chilling glimpse into the structural horror of the inn. The small space behind the cabinet is not part of your room. It is a meticulously constructed wooden chimney, not for fire, but for sound. It is a narrow, vertical shaft built into the space between the walls, running straight up. And within this chimney, the air is not still. You can see, through the tiny square, a faint, continuous draft moving upwards. This structure immediately connects to a horrifying piece of true historical horror, one often whispered by the inn's few long-term guests, the ritual of the sound conduit. In extreme cases of sealing a person within the walls, the families needed a way to gauge the spirit's distress without opening the confinement. The solution was the construction of a small, thin vertical air shaft, a sound chimney that acted as an acoustic conduit, drawing the faint sounds of weeping, scratching, or eventual silence from the sealed box up to a vent near the ceiling. The terrifying truth is that the boundary bird was placed there not just to watch, but to cover the final vent, ensuring that the sound was contained and that only the family could hear the captive's sorrow. You realize the implication, the tiny, faint cry you heard at the beginning of the night, the whimper that started this entire nightmare, was not muffled by the walls. It was carefully and deliberately channeled down to you from the structure above, via this chimney. The source of the endless sound is not the wall beside you, but the structure above the room. The endless crying doesn't come from the small sealed box in the corner. It comes from the sealed-off attic above. You look up, your gaze fixed on the ceiling, suddenly understanding the terrifying verticality of your confinement. The child's sorrow is not in the earth beneath you, but in the roof above you. The floor-level confinement was only a distraction. The high-pitched whine of the shadow of abandonment stops instantly. The silence is profound. And then, from directly above the ceiling beams, right where the sound chimney vents, you hear a deep, slow, ominous creak. It is the sound of heavy, dry wood shifting under immense, sudden weight, as if a small, concentrated mass has just moved right above your head. In the dark, dusty attic, the sound is not rushed or hurried. It is deliberate, heavy, and final. The silence that follows is the worst yet, the silence of a new search beginning. A new, final presence having found its way out of the chimney and onto the floorboards directly above your head. The slow, heavy, ominous creak from the attic floorboards above you has silenced everything. The whining shadow of abandonment is gone. The sorrowful whimper is gone. All that remains is the profound stillness of a building holding its breath, waiting for the concentrated weight to move again. Can you feel the dust sifting down from the ceiling, dislodged by the movement above? It's a very fine, earthy dust that tastes faintly metallic. You realize you are now directly beneath the source of the sorrow, the final chamber of confinement. The Oni of the boundaries has delivered you to the ultimate prison. You are the only living anchor in a room that the outside world believes is empty. You look down at the dark, tightly wound spiral of black thread on the low table. Amito, the ritual of the spirit's coil, was meant to neutralize residual energy, But perhaps the true, terrifying meaning is that the spiral is a clock, a counting down of the confined spirit's patience. The thread's energy is spent. And now the true, heavier terror has been released from its confinement in the attic. You need to know what is above you. You move your eyes quickly around the ceiling, searching for any weakness. The beams are massive, and the planks are thick. But near the center, you spot a final, disturbing, mysterious detail. Etched into the dark wood of one of the thick ceiling planks near the center of the room is a series of small, rhythmic scratches. They are not random, they are organized into short, parallel, vertical lines, separated by small horizontal lines, a system of tally marks. You count them quickly. Your mind racing there are hundreds, perhaps thousands of them, meticulously carved into the wood. This detail is a chilling connection to a true historical horror event from the Edo period, the counting prisoner, Kazueru Hito. This was a legend concerning solitary confinement where prisoners would carve small, repetitive marks into their wooden cells to keep track of the passing days, weeks, and years. The truly terrifying aspect was that the counting was believed to keep the prisoner alive, the necessity of the task holding their consciousness tethered to the reality of time. The moment the counting stopped, the prisoner either died or transitioned into a fully formed, time-obsessed entity, a spirit whose sole purpose was to continue its count. You realize the truth. The silent horror above you was not just confined. It was counting. And the final heavy creak you just heard means the entity has completed its count, the task is finished, the Yurei has become the Oni. You manage a single, dry joke, your voice a desperate rasp. They really should have installed a small window. It's difficult to keep track of the years in the dark. The sound of the shamisen from the distant valley suddenly cuts off mid-note. The silence that follows is absolute and unbroken. A total vacuum of sound, both internal and external. Then, from directly above you, the sound begins again. It is not the creak of wood this time. It is a slow, methodical tapping. Not the playful tapping from the walls, but a heavier, duller sound, as if something thick and rough is pressing against the floorboards directly above your head, right where you are crouched. Tap, pause, tap, pause. It is slow, regular, and terrifyingly precise. You press your palms flat against the futon, trying to feel the vibration through the thick bedding. You feel the faint, dull impact of the tapping, like a heavy, cold drumbeat that is entirely out of rhythm with your own racing heart. The tapping stops. The air in the room suddenly changes. The intense, deep cold that has permeated the night fades, replaced by a sudden, unnatural warmth that rises up from the tatami mat. It is a suffocating, close heat, the kind of heat that smells of stagnant air and old breath. And then you hear the final sound. It is no longer outside the wall, above the ceiling, or across the room. It is here, a soft, sustained hush of breathing. It is slow, deep, and unnervingly close. It is coming from the dark space underneath the low wooden table, the table around which the black thread is spiraled. It is not the sound of a sleeping person, but the sound of something perfectly still, perfectly aware, breathing slowly and patiently into the dust. You look at the dark space beneath the table, the source of the warm, close breath. You are trapped, the keeper of the weight, and the counter has finished its count and is now simply resting. Inches from your knees, the close, heavy breathing underneath the table is the last sound. You do not move, you do not scream. You simply allow the immense, crushing silence of the inn to settle around you, accepting the terrifying intimacy of the moment. The fear, having reached its terrible climax, now begins its slow, agonizing recession. You are not physically harmed, but your perception of reality, your sense of safety, is irrevocably altered. You close your eyes, not in panic, but in exhaustion. The suffocation lifts. The oppressive heat of the final breath fades, replaced by the natural coolness of the mountain night seeping back into the room. You realize the entity has achieved its final goal, complete stillness. The sorrow has been acknowledged. The count has finished, and the new keeper has been sealed. The confinement is perfect. You begin to breathe slowly, matching your own rhythm to the vast, quiet breathing of the old wooden inn itself. The finger notches, the black lacquer, the sealed shoji, they are no longer threats, but ancient, sacred architecture dedicated to an endless memory. You are now part of the history, another quiet layer in the sediment of time. You let the weight of the futon and the rough texture of the tatami mat ground you. You focus on the feeling of your own heartbeat, slow and steady, a fragile ember of life in this museum of grief. The room is dark. The silence is profound. The only sound is your own slow, steady inhalation and exhalation, blending with the sound of the ancient breath beneath the table. You are drifting, allowing the immense, cold presence to become a part of your own sleep. The sorrow is not banished. It is merely waiting. And you are waiting with it, cradled in the perfect, deep peace of the Omaya Ryokan, where the wait is forever and the night is long.